Welcome to the Everyday Spirituality Podcast. I'm James Hazelwood, author, bishop, and spiritual companion, bringing you interviews and information at the intersection of a gritty Christian mysticism and depth psychology. You can find all the episode show notes, as well as my free Substack newsletter, Notebooks, at jameshazelwood.net. Now, on to the show. Hello and welcome to episode 85 of the podcast. Today we have a real treat. I'm going to skip over the news and just give you a quick personal updates and then talk about our guest, Sheila Petruccelli.
And so many spiritual experiences are before words and beyond words. And how do we speak about that, maybe in a way that doesn't use language?
The feedback I got after the Substack newsletter article that I wrote on the Holy Trinity and Robin Williams was really fascinating because a lot of you had a lot of opinions. Who knew that the Holy Trinity could be such a topic for conversation? And I heard from people who objected to it, that felt it was too descriptive, and maybe even bordering on heresy, which was just a delight. I love it when I get accused of heresy. And then I heard of other people who just thought, oh, it just helped them understand something that is ununderstandable. So that was just really fascinating. You can always write me, jim@jameshazelwood.net, and we'll continue this conversation. Today on the podcast, I have Sheila Petruccelli, who is the Director of Creative Embodiment at the Haden Institute. She's also a spiritual director, and this is just a podcast with a lot of laughter between the two of us and stories of our resistance to one another. We also talk about poetry. We also talk about creative shame, and Sheila is just one of those people that for me, just kind of lights up the world. And so I wanted to share with you all this conversation we had about a month ago. And just let's go there now. So today on the Everyday Spirituality, this is going to be great. And Sheila is, among many, many hats that she wears, the Director of Creative Embodiment at the Haden Institute. She's a spiritual director, and I have learned a lot from her in our brief relationship. So it's great to have you on the Everyday Spirituality podcast. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Just great to get to talk to you.
And so let's start with establishing all of your credentials. Well, folks, this is why this is an audio only podcast. The reason I say that is because your credentials come from within you and what the divine has done through that. So I actually asked that as a serious question. I'm not looking for, what junior high school you went to or anything like that. So let's just talk about that credentials. What does that mean?
So I went to Burnett Junior High School in Union, New Jersey. Honestly, that's where I fell in love with poetry. So that's interesting that you say that. So my title is Director of Creative Embodiment. And what I always say is when you make up the job, you get to make up the title. So the title, doesn't really mean anything except it kind of describes what I do. That came out of my experience going through spiritual direction training when the program was very heady and there was no outlet for things to come out in any way. except through academic forms. And my mentor at Haden brought that to our small group. And I had done, I wouldn't call it art. I'm not trained, and art and artist is such a, it's hard to say, it's hard to hear, it's hard to, accept, but it's my way. So credentials is just, it is something deep within me that unfortunately is not certifiable, even though I am certifiable in other ways. So so I'm not trained in that way of, I can tell you I have an MFA in painting and I paint. I don't have an MFA in writing and I write. So that's
but clearly the credentialing, which we could probably just leave that word behind, is like, but basically out of your life experience, you have found a way forward. And so let's talk about what you do at creating at Haden with this creative embodiment, because I think that will help people get a sense for. So you're right. Part of the program there, and I think a lot of places, is very heady. Lots of books, lots of papers. Now, I love that world. I live in that world. But you do something else for people in that program. What is it that you do?
Yeah. And I always feel like I have to say, I have 2 English degrees. I have read a lot of books. And books give us other people's experience. And we find our own experience in that. And yet it's their voice, which is, what is attractive. When we find a book that we love, I believe it's because there's a resonance between our voice and their voice. And so what I tried to do is kind of take that middle step out, and how do we hear our own voice not reflected or not mirrored, but in that face-to-face way of what am I trying to say? What do I have to say? What are my words? What are my images? And I say this is David Whyte, this may be not David Whyte, but to me it is. He has this phrase, image fills the gap before and beyond words. And so many spiritual experiences are before words and beyond words. And how do we speak about that, maybe in a way that doesn't use language? And so that's what I try to do. And this is audio only, but I'm making this like mushing gesture with my hands. It to me, I always say, listen to your hands. What do your hands have to say? And that's one of the, that's probably the best advice I have.
Yeah. And so I remember at the retreat, and we'll talk about my entrance into that in a little bit, but so I just walked into this room and there was everything available, like paints and threads and old magazines and old children's books and texture. And you just said to people, okay. and what people create out of that, and you really leave people on their own a lot. You're not like, okay, so this is what you do. It's not like paint by numbers. But you just kind of walk alongside them. And so it's embodiment, but it's not like we're doing yoga and then painting what we did. It's just really a different way. It's spiritual direction through arts and crafts, which sounds just so reducing it to something that sounds kitschy, but it's not at all. Just describe for people what the room is like that you set up for people.
So what I say is the inspiration for that space is an enchanted cottage, a forgotten chapel, and my grandmother's kitchen. That was the feel that I went into it with. And I'm intimidated by Michael's, like the craft store, like all the things, because they all have rules and ways you're supposed to use the things. So a lot of the stuff is just approachable in that way, how art is intimidating. I'm intimidated. So I try to make it very and even childlike is not the right word, but to lower that like beret and easel, of like, we have to be, have these linen smocks and the right thing and the squirrel brush and, squirrel hair brush. And so if it's approachable, people will approach. And it is that, like, I think of courting like an animal, like just like how there's a wariness, a lot of creative shame comes in from childhood. And, you get those people who don't have creative shame. And it's like, I want to bottle that and just give it out. They're just so excited and they just want to get in the space. But that's not the majority of people. Majority of people have a lot of shame around it. So I try to just have things that people recognize, like fabric, like thread, like books, and to use them in different ways. And I always say, there are no rules. And if that scares you, we can make some rules.
Yeah, say more about creative shame. I assume what I hear in that and think about in my own life is I may have just had a delightful experience when I was 3, 4, or 5, but somewhere along the line, somebody said, I drew a picture of a tree, and somebody said, that doesn't look like a tree.
Yep.
Is that what you're talking about?
Yep. So Brene Brown has a statistic that I will not remember because I wouldn't get out of bed in the morning, but it is above 50%. I want to say it's 70%. In all her studies about shame, creative shame was one of the top measurements that she had. And it was an outrageous number and people remember the day that it came in. I remember the day it came in, first grade. I can tell you the story. And it's still there. Like, you can hear it in my voice. It's still there. And it is that it's around drawing usually, because art equals drawing, and drawing that we can recognize as the thing. And so if you don't fit into that very small box, you are not creative, you are not an artist. And we learn that very early. And okay, that's not for me, that's not mine. And we carry that shame, and that shame walks into that space. And that's what I try to meet is that 6-year-old, that 7-year-old who wants to, and yet, got shamed, was disciplined, was whatever happened, but that story walks in with them.
So how do you weave spiritual direction into that?
So it's literally, if I could reduce it to one thing, it is meeting the person where they are, which I think, in my experience of receiving spiritual direction, the best direction I've ever had is to be met where I am, and to just be held in that threshold place. I don't, like you said, I don't give direction. It's not paint by number. And I always say those are the people who make the most money, is who tell you how to do it. And if we can just hold the space, if I can just hold the space, it's going to be bigger than I could ever even imagine of what can happen. Even if it's someone wrapping thread around a bamboo stick. I don't know what's going on. And I know enough to know I don't know. And I just give them a wide, and just honestly hold that sacred space.
So let's use this as an opportunity to talk about our first encounter, and then our relationship and the arc of that. So I'll just start to set it all up. So I was in the Haden program in the middle of the pandemic, so it's all by Zoom. So yes, that's convenient. And just like we're having this conversation over 1,000 miles away or whatever, that was great. But there was no 3D aspect of it. And so I think it's the first session of the first week, we're online, and there's going to be this journaling intensive. And to just condense a long story short, I kind of walk into this Zoom room on journaling intensive and just and leave within 7 minutes. And I'm like, I am not going here. This woman is crazy. Why isn't there a book about this? There should be a PowerPoint presentation with with highlights and bullets, and I'm out of there. And so that's like the first session. And then because it's a pandemic, the second intensive gets canceled and it's on Zoom. And then the third one. And every time you're offering these electives, I'm just like conveniently busy. I've got other stuff going. But then the fourth intensive, we're at Mount Carmel in Canada, and you show up, and I'm like, I can't even describe what shifted in me, but I went to the session you were leading with our group, and I was just brought to a new place, and then entered into that creative space. And you you handed me a little tiny children's book, and here, tear this apart and work with that. And I mean, I had no excuse. I couldn't go anywhere. It was cold and rainy outside. So, so I did it. And anyway, and it just really opened up. And I'll put on the blog so if people want to see this little booklet that I made in relationship to dreams. And then just had confession with you and said, I have really judged you in this whole thing in a way that is clearly more about me than it is about anything else. And so when you talked about creative shame, which I'd never heard you talk about that before, I was like, oh, now I know what that was all about.
Yeah.
And my defensiveness was to not go there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And, so I really unhook from what, if people don't come or why they come or projections that are put on me. Like, I know, that there's something else in the room. And if we can get underneath that, and again, it's not for me to get underneath, like, Jim, why aren't you coming to the creative space? And one way that I keep myself honest with that is I put myself, so for me, walking into the creative space, it's like, this is my jam. This is my church. This is my holy place. I just want to get in there and do all the things. But for me to remember what it's like for other people to come in, I have to walk into a Pilates studio, in my jeans, in my cowboy boots, in, my Jersey accent. And they all have those like nice voices, and they all have like those socks with the toes. They know how to use the machines. They're all fit. And I am coming out of my skin. Because I don't know what to do. I want to run 7 minutes. I wouldn't even give it 7 minutes. But I have to have that memory in my body, because it's easy to forget that this isn't the welcoming, yummy place for people. And again, that's embodiment. It's like we can convince ourselves of, oh yeah, I remember what that's like to walk into an uncomfortable place. Like, oh, have you walked into an uncomfortable place in a while? And again, like that, I'm coming out of my skin. So to constantly give myself that, which, Pilates is very convenient because I don't go back. It's like, oh, okay, I remember. Thank you. I'm going to go get a coffee now. So yeah, it is. It keeps me. It lets me bow to when people do walk in. That I don't know what it took you to walk in this place. And I bow to that because I don't know. And one of the other things I say is the bravest thing someone could do is walk in, look around, and go out. Like that's all they can take right now. And I don't know what that cost them, what they had to get over to do that. And just literally holding that for them. It may never come to making a book or anything.
And what I'm hearing is something that you're not saying, but you're saying, which is you're trusting that all of this work is spiritual direction, is sacred,
Absolutely.
is, yeah.
Yes.
And yet you're not connecting it to labels. I hear you. You're not even pausing. You're not even going there. It's like whatever it is, there's something holy here, but we can't articulate it in terms of words and paragraphs and all that.
Yeah. So I feel like I have to be disarming in that way so my memory of the first time you were in the creative space is we were talking about baseball, and like you were standing there, like you didn't move, like you're standing there, you have the thing in your hand, and we're just kind of shooting the shit, and you didn't really do anything. And it was just like, and then my shoulders relaxed, like, okay, we can go about the Yankees and the Red Sox. Like, I got you, and just that, to whatever it is for your body to relax in that space. And then not even in hopes like maybe he'll come back. It's like, this is where we are. This is where we're meeting. And can we meet each other?
Yeah, I'd forgotten that part of it. It's bringing it all back to me. So when you work with folks with spiritual direction outside of Haden on your own, do they come to a place that you host? Do you do this online? Now, how does that work in terms of, I guess, both the in-person and the online spiritual direction sessions you do with people?
So I do meet with people online. A lot of people come to me because they know my work at Haden. And so I don't do necessarily creative practice with people in my private practice. But what I feel like it is this, what is the same or what's the thread is this working with before and beyond words. And I listen for energy and I listen for image. And even so in physical space, when people, show me what they've done, there's an energy to it. They want to talk about the image. So that translates whether there's a 3D, like a physical representation or not. I'll listen for patterning. I'll listen for image in what they say. And then we kind of go into that. Like I'll reflect back. Like I hear you saying, cut the cord, let's go into that. What is that? Where does that bring us? That's kind of how I work with people in private practice. And again, it's meeting whatever shows up, however they show up, and trusting that I don't have to fix it. I don't have to figure it out. I don't have to explain it. I just have to hold the space and listen deeply. And again, we do learn all these fancy techniques, in this 2-year training. And yes, we need that. And can I set all that aside? Yep, these are tools I have, and it's showing up with nothing preconceived, with just meeting what enters the space between us.
Yeah, I've found that when I am doing spiritual direction, if I focus on the fact that basically 95% of the session is me listening, that's far more helpful than me pontificating on my wisdom for other people.
Which is legion.
Yeah, and then
you heard it here, folks. You heard it here.
So, who comes to you for spiritual direction? Are these people that are attending their local Presbyterian church, and who do you connect with? I'm thinking that's not the case.
I'm like seeing the faces of my clients. There's a segment of my practice is clergy who are wrestling with who they are professionally and who they know themselves to be personally on a spiritual level. And that is a sticky tangle. That is a tangle. Okay, so this just dropped for me. What I can say about all my clients is they say, I can't tell anybody else this. I don't know what that means. But if I had to line up everyone I've ever met, it's for some reason they know they can tell me that thing, that story, that dream, that experience. The thing that they can't say, they can say in that space. I don't say that in a way of arrogance and I don't, it's not like I have a sign.
Right.
Tell me
Right.
anything. And that's the truth. I really do, even in and that's probably a similarity between what I do at Haden in that physical space and my practice online is there's a permission, which I keep having to give myself. That's a projection that I hold that is so not true. And my spiritual directors can tell you that of just, I am clamped down. I have the good girl in me, all of that. And yet, if I can keep giving myself permission to unshackle a little bit, to open a little bit, to say the thing that I can't say, that I think that translates.
I'm fascinated by, you started off by saying, you work with clergy, and then you identified, well, it's really everybody. Everybody's, they can say and articulate and experience things, and with you that I've never told anybody else this. Yeah, that's the heart of spiritual direction, companionship, walking with people, doing this work. And what a gift that you give them for that space being there, either in you or around you or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued with, so you work with clergy, and I remember, I'm just going to tie this back to our first meeting before we met, which was that Alan said, hey, we've got this guy who's going to do this podcast for Haden. Would you be a part of it? And the story that I heard was like, there is no blanking way I am going on a podcast with a bishop, if among any others.
Yeah, we give as good as we get. It's like, you judge me, I judge you. We are cut from the same cloth. Absolutely. Because what I do doesn't really translate. It is hard to talk about. And so, and I grew up Roman Catholic. So bishop to me is, I know different. And that hierarchical, just trips so much in me. And it was like, not no, hell no. So, but the first time I met you, what you said is you did the stand-up comedian thing.
Yeah.
Oh, he's tall. And then I said, well, what do you do in life? And then you gave your, 90-word title. And I'm like, oh God, he's the bishop.
Yeah.
But that's how I met you was we talked about the comedian thing. Oh, I hope that's not to your audience.
No, they can find it on YouTube. Oh yeah. All right. Well, this is great. So, what have we missed today? I mean, a lot. Obviously, can't cover everything. But is there, something that I haven't asked you about that I should have?
Let me go over all the notes that I made.
Ooh, you are.
Well, you sent out that sheet, and I'm like, oh, I got to do this. I got to do this. Oh, I have a poem.
Oh, good.
And to me, it's, again, poetry is probably my first love, my only love, my eternal love, because it says the thing we can't say. And for me, this poem, and this is where I would like to end as in this is the beginning of, for people who think it's too late. All right, well, I've lived this long without this, whether they've carried creative shame or not, whether we've carried creative shame or not, there's something about it's too late. I've survived this long. I'm doing pretty good. I don't need to go in that door. I don't need to open that door. I don't need to go in that room, literal or figuratively. And this poem for me speaks to that ripe place that we may ignore. And it's from Robert Bly, who unfortunately had to die before I got him, which is unfortunate, and it's time out of time. So, and Jim, you would think I would mark the page.
Well, it's funny you mentioned Robert Bly, because he was one of the first poets that I connected with 40 years ago, and did get a chance to hear him read a couple of times. And yeah, his poetry and translations of Rilke and other pieces like that. And his work, he's got this great book that James Hillman, who was a Jungian analyst, and then Michael Meade, who does a lot of mythology, the Rag and Bone Shop of the Heart is a volume of poetry for men that they edited. It's fantastic. So I'm curious as to which of Bly's poems you found.
So this is from his book, Loving a Woman in Two Worlds, and it's called Conversation with a Holy Woman Not Seen for Many Years. And so I just offer this as your creativity is waiting for you, and to hear it in this way. After so many years, I come walking to you. You say, "You have come after so long?" I could not come earlier. I could not come earlier. My shabby mouth with its cavernous thirst ate the seeds of longing that should have been planted. Awkward and baffled, dishonest, I slept, and I dreamt of sand. Your eyes in sorrow do not laugh. I say, I have come after so many years.
Beautiful. Well, that's a great note to end on. So, Sheila, where can people find you if they're interested in connecting with you?
See, if I was fancy and credentialed, I would say you could come to my website. But I don't have that. It's not my way. I'm on Instagram at Sheila.Petruccelli, which is irregular and gives a glimpse into my practice. I have a new bio coming out on Haden's new website, whenever that will be, probably this summer. I hate writing those things, but you can find me there, and you can find me.
You know what? In the future, you can ask me, and I'll write your bio for you. How's that?
Perfect. I didn't know you did that.
Yeah, it's a side hustle.
Know?
Well, I don't advertise it to many people.
You drip it out. It's like you drip it out. You don't want to just give it all away the first date. So
yeah. I love the Instagram. That is a great way that people can go there and really see what you do. It's a visual.
Yeah, it's a visual. So yeah, it's like a bite-sized blog. I used to blog in the bloggity blog days, but this is about all I can do is bite-sized. So
perfect. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Jim.